Welcome to Voices of Reason. My name is Terry Tracy, and I am pleased to introduce the Keystone Candidate Forum brought to you by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Keystone Candidate Forum is a special joint venture series designed to highlight those candidates from both sides of the aisle, running the most competitive races in the most competitive state in the nation. As we enter the final weeks of the election, Voices of Reason and the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry strive to provide you, voter, with the opportunity to cut through the partisan rhetoric and overwrought campaign advertisements and hear directly from those who seek to serve our Commonwealth in high office, how they intend to address those issues that you care about the most. To kick off the series, we are honored to have Congressman Scott Perry join us. Congressman Perry is the incumbent Republican congressman representing Central Pennsylvania's 10th congressional district. He was first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2012, where he has championed free speech issues, a robust energy economy, and strategic infrastructure investment. He also served in the military for nearly 4 decades, flying 44 overseas combat missions, and retired as a brigadier general in the Army National Guard in 2019. Congressman Perry is also an entrepreneur, small business owner, and father of two daughters. Congressman Perry faces former local news anchor and Democrat Janelle Stelson in the general election. And while most political analysts have the district rated as lean Republican, Democrats have targeted the seat as a potential pickup opportunity to eat into the Republicans' razor-thin majority in the U.S. House of Representatives this year. Congressman Perry, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Again, thank you so much for providing the opportunity, providing the forum for people to get to know me, ask questions, hear my viewpoints. And, I make votes on behalf of the people that I represent, but I think it's important that they know how I've come to my conclusion, what my rationale is for my vote. I appreciate this opportunity to let them know.
We're very happy to have you. And also joining us today is my co-host, John Anzer. John served as the Vice President of Public Affairs for the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, and he is based in Harrisburg. Gentlemen, with that, let's get started. Congressman, we'd like to begin by giving you a few minutes to introduce yourself to our listeners and describe what you believe is most at stake in this election, not just for our Commonwealth and for your constituents, but also for the nation this fall. Upon the conclusion of your remarks, I'll turn it over to John for the first question. And from there, we will just have a lot of fun, I guess. So, Congressman, with that, the floor is yours.
Well, awesome. Just to let some folks know about me things you might not know about me. I grew up right here in the heart of the 10th congressional district. I live in a little town named Dillsburg. This is where I grew up. It's where I went to high school. I started out here. My mom was a single mom, lived in this I hate to call it, but it was a party house for a local college. So there was no electricity, no running water, no insulation. As you know, it gets cold in the wintertime. And as a child, that's kind of was part of my upbringing, which is a little hard scrabble, but it teaches you learn to appreciate things. And I watched my mom struggle during my early life with employment, making enough money to keep her family fed and clothed. We went shopping once a year. I got 2 pair of pants that were to last all year, and that was right before the school year began. And look, we had each other, and that's what we knew growing up, and so that was kind of normal for me. I started out in Harrisburg on Berry Hill Street, but then moved to that little farmhouse, and there's a whole story behind that. But I'm living the American dream. I'm the first in my family to earn a college degree. I started a business. I hired people. I was able to build my home and start a family. And since I was 18, I volunteered in my community and served in my community, and something that I think is very important. These are things that can only happen in America. Like I said, coming from a background of the way I did as a child, yet I joined the Army when I was 18 as a private and became a general officer. These things are the American dream, but what I continue to fight for, or what I went to Congress to fight for. And by the way, I had never had any plans to be in elective office. People like me that don't know anybody and don't have any money never seem to be the people that would run for office and certainly win. But I looked at the direction of our country and look at the American dream for everybody slipping away. The people that are around my community that I see at the gas station, the grocery store, the local hardware store, you name it, they say they can't afford their daily lives anymore. They've had to give things up. They're buying their groceries on credit card, and they can't afford their electricity bills or their daycare bills. That's not supposed to be how it is in America. And our streets aren't safe. We had a young lady killed, brutally raped and murdered by somebody here illegally, and then to find out that from the Department of Homeland Security that over the last 4 years, 13,000 convicted murderers have been let into our country, and they're just wandering around. 450,000 violent felons in our country wandering around, just let in. We want to be able to. We want to know that our family members. My wife and I have two daughters. We want to know that they can, go up by this to get the school bus or get off the school bus, and that they're going to make it down the driveway without somebody taking them from us. And so that's a concern for me. And of course, generally speaking, I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I serve on the Intelligence Committee. What's happening around the globe? I think it's got people's anxiety up. We have gotten ourselves involved in a couple wars. Of course, China is saber rattling in Taiwan, and that whole region of the world has huge implications for us economically, since we've offshored so many things to the Far East. Our connection to being able to buy prescription drugs, metals, so many critical things. Those are all concerning, and whether we're going to be safe as Americans when you know that North Korea has ballistic missiles and nuclear capability, when Iran has ballistic missiles and perfecting nuclear capability, and what's happening with our allies, the Jewish state. So these are all concerns that are weighing on families. And so my job is to be the voice of the people, 760,000 people in this 10th district, and to make sure that those concerns are heard in Washington, and that we're trying to find solutions, not just complaining about them, but trying to find a solution, whether that's across the aisle, on the same side of the aisle, on both sides of the aisle, but just working tirelessly to make sure their voice is heard, make sure their concerns are heard, and make sure their concerns are addressed with some kind of viable solution. So that's what I've done. Now, people say, well, you've been there a long time and there's still a lot of problems. I just want to remind everybody that 8 of the years I've been there, I've served under Democrat presidencies, and we see things very differently. And over this period of time, we have become a less affluent society. It's harder to make a living, and your money doesn't go that far. Over that period of time, we've become a less healthy society. And I can get into all the metrics of that, but trends are not in the right direction. And so I'm hoping to see a dramatic change in that. And I think that a lot of the American people are just kind of sick and tired of wondering what their future is. So I hope that kind of wraps up where I'd like to go and where I think our country's headed.
Thank you, Congressman. John?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. Appreciate that intro and you joining us today. There's a lot to unpack there, and I'm sure we'll get to a lot of it here. But I want to start off. You talked about your experience starting a business and working in
Yeah.
the private sector. As you know, the Pennsylvania Chamber represents nearly 10,000 businesses of all sizes in every industry across Pennsylvania. These are businesses that their employers get up every day and they worry about making payroll and taking care of
Yeah.
their employees. And you've lived that. And
Yes.
how does your experience as a small business owner influence how you approach your job in Washington as a legislator?
Well, that's an awesome question, John. And I was one of the people that worried about payroll, insurance, receivables, taxes, regulations on a regular basis. And people that haven't been in business never think about those things. They just think that the owner of the business is somehow fabulously wealthy. All I did, as you probably recognize, John, like many of the businesses that you represent, is anytime we made any money, we hired somebody if we could. We bought it, we put it right back into the business, into better equipment, more capacity, more ability to make our community better and do more things. And so with that, oftentimes I'm faced with a tax question or a regulatory question. And many times, my colleagues will say, certainly colleagues that have never owned a business, they will say something like, well, government needs to be a good partner with business. And I would just tell you, as a former business owner, what I wasn't looking for was another partner. It was tough enough running my business, trying to make decisions with the team that I was working with. I certainly didn't need a partner that didn't have a vested interest in the outcomes of it, telling me how to do things. I was the one getting up early in the morning, oftentimes out in the field, steel toe work boots on, work gloves, sweating it out, hard hat or whatever. And then at night, after 6, 7 o'clock, sitting down at the kitchen table with specifications, working on bids to try and get the next job, or working on, making sure the billing got out on time or the payables got out on time. So that's my framework. That's how I approach things. Government is supposed to set up the architecture, the framework for individuals and for businesses to thrive, not be meddling in them, not be getting involved with them. As a matter of fact, the more that we can let business just do its thing, the more efficient it becomes, because that's how the free market works. It's more efficient and it's more productive, and that's my viewpoint coming from experience.
Congressman, you touched on federal regulation, and I think related to that is also out of control federal spending. You have been a longtime advocate for a balanced budget amendment and cutting federal spending. But how do you balance the need to invest in things like strategic infrastructure improvements, or establishing the necessary framework for prosperity and growth, providing a platform for a more robust and prosperous energy economy in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, with also paring back on federal spending and getting our debt and deficit under control?
Well, I will tell you, one of the things that most people don't realize, that members of Congress, every single spending bill that we vote on, every cent that we vote on is actually all borrowed money. All the rest of it just gets spent anyhow. We don't even vote on it. And so always very, I look at it with a very discerning eye at what we're spending people's money on. And of course, I always look at what the impact is going to be. Right now, like I said, my bosses can't afford their daily bills, right? What they used to buy 4 years ago, they can't afford today. And so I always kind of take an approach that looks at it from that viewpoint. And of course, also because, I put my hand on the Bible and taken an oath to the Constitution. And there are certain things that government should be involved in. Obviously, infrastructure. We got a new bridge going across Route 83. The people here that live here that pay taxes deserve that new capacity. If you've sat out there in the morning or in the evening, it's a parking lot. They deserve that, and they've paid for that. But what shouldn't come for that is a bunch of policies that the people didn't ask for, that are not in my view, constitutional, like forcing them, for instance, into Green New Deal social engineering programs. Yes, the government and for the Constitution has a place in infrastructure, but we don't need to be forcing people to make choices that they wouldn't normally make. If you want to buy an electric car, God bless you. You should be able to do that. If you don't want to, you shouldn't have to. If you want to buy a gas stove, you should be allowed to do that. If you want to buy an electric stove, God bless you. That should be your right. But the government too oftentimes tries to, through policy or through regulation, and generally speaking, through both, with money, tries to coerce our citizens to make the choices that the government wants us to make. That's not the free market. That's not freedom. And so I can't be part of that. So just to give you an example, the last highway bill, it's a highway bill, right? It was only 20 some percent highway and bridge. The other 70 some percent was Green New Deal stuff that has nothing to do with the hard infrastructure that we need. Instead of fixing one bridge in the district, we probably could have fixed all the federal roads and the bridges in the district, if we would just view things from the point of what the proper role of government is and what it isn't.
Congressman, in the same context of federal spending, we're seeing many Democratic campaigns this election cycle focusing on this new term called greedflation, which is essentially a made up word to blame businesses for
Yes.
rising costs. And when most economists today would point to the $10 trillion in
Yeah.
federal spending over the last half a decade that's occurred. What do you equate rising inflation to, and what steps can Congress take to bring costs down for Pennsylvania businesses that are quite frankly dealing with rising costs just like everybody else?
Yeah, thank you so much, John. The rising costs are clearly and directly and unequivocally associated with out of control federal spending. Bar none, stop the conversation. This whole made up term of greedflation. Look, I know that that my friends on the other side of the aisle want somebody to blame, but they need to look in the mirror instead of businesses. If you really believe that every single business that you go to, and I mean every single one, from your local lumber store to the big box store to your local grocery store to the little corner store, how is it that every single one of them have gotten together in some room and said, you know what, we're all going to raise our prices and we're all going to shrink the amount by which for each product we sell, that we're all going to do that. These are your neighbors, these are people that live right beside you that are paying the same bill. And quite honestly, the Democrats, the left, the Biden Harris administration in particular, ought to be thanking these businesses. I know as consumers, like we get upset with it, but if you think you're going to go out and buy half a gallon of ice cream, first of all, there's no such thing as a half gallon anymore. Now, you're going to pay a lot more for the packaging that you get, and the packaging is going to be smaller. When I say thank the businesses, I'm talking about the Biden administration. The Biden administration should thank these businesses, because if they didn't make the packaging smaller, the price would actually even be higher. What they're trying to do is find a way to sell their product and make it somehow affordable for people to buy it, even in the face of just ever rising cost, completely rising costs. And gentlemen and ladies, as you know, energy is a component of every single thing, whether it's making the ice cream or getting the ice cream to your store or running the freezer that the ice cream's in. And as long as this administration is anti-American energy, the cost of energy is going to go up, and it's going to be reflected in every single thing in the supply chain. And of course, they don't want to have that conversation. They don't want to talk about it because they're responsible for it. So they come up with a catchy name, greedflation. Well, I'll tell you who the greedy ones are. The greedy ones are the people that are doing it at the federal level. It's them.
There is arguably no more important issue in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania than the potential that could be realized through its energy economy.
Right.
And you have supported an all above approach energy strategy, from fossil fuels to renewables. Let's give everybody a shot. Everyone
Yep.
has a role to play. Um, and I want to hear about the economic potential from you and what we need to do in order to realize that. But there's also a very significant national security
Yes.
consideration.
I'm glad you brought it up.
Pennsylvania represents perhaps one of the most significant strategic threats to nations like, adversary nations like Russia and China. So we often talk about the energy economy in terms of new jobs, in terms of making sure we have a healthy environment, and they're important. But I'd love to hear you touch for a few moments on the geopolitical strategic importance of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and sort of the interrelated impacts that can have on not just our economy, but on the overall sort of future of our nation.
Yeah. Such a wide ranging, broad, sweeping question. Let's just start out with the fact that Americans deserve and can have clean, abundant, and affordable energy if we allow the market to do its job. The all above approach works in that paradigm, and those who produce the best and the most efficiently will win that race. Now, geostrategically, uh, what people don't realize is right now we're fighting wars, or we're involved in wars. Let's say Russia and Ukraine. Russia is able to prosecute that war because they're selling energy around the globe, but particularly to Europe. Europe has been crying out for American energy, particularly Pennsylvania natural gas, LNG, and as a hedge against being held hostage by Russia. But we have throttled. We won't even build a pipeline anymore. We can't even, before we even talk about overseas, let's talk about the United States of America. We're buying Russian gas in New England because we can't use Pennsylvania natural gas because we can't get it there either by pipeline. And actually, we can't even build a ship because of federal regulations. We can't even build a ship to get it there. So the point is that we're funding this Ukrainian war. We're sending munitions over there. But not only that, we're actually paying for their bureaucracy. because Russia has the money to prosecute that war. And they have the money to prosecute that war because they're selling their energy to Europe. If Europe could buy their energy from the United States, and in particular Pennsylvania on the East Coast, sitting on hundreds of years of energy reserves, they could tell Russia to get out. Russia wouldn't be making that money. They wouldn't be using it to advance their war in Ukraine. And we could squeeze Russia out of Ukraine without sending munitions, without losing more lives. But it doesn't just stop at Russia and Ukraine. It also goes to Iran, who has been relieved of the sanctions, who is selling their oil abroad. If we could replace the oil and the petroleum products that they're supplying abroad, we could also squeeze them out, and they wouldn't be able to afford their proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. Right now, the United States of America's the greatest military in the world is being outdone in the Gulf of Aden, that's Yemen, by terrorists and flip-flops in John boats. It's absolutely outrageous. And so while the market seeks to address these issues, it is our federal government that stops us from doing it. It doesn't not only hurts us from a national security standpoint as a country, but it hurts Pennsylvania in particular. I was around, and I suspect you were. If you went up in the mid-state 15, 20 years ago, family farms were going out, that they were just walking away from their mortgages because they couldn't afford them anymore, and they couldn't afford to farm anymore. And it was like going back in time up there. With the advent of exploration for gas and oil across the Marcellus Shale and the Utica Shale, it revitalized not only that whole region, but the entire state. The entire state benefits from that. And every time we hamstring that and choke ourselves off in that, all we're doing is hurting ourselves, hurting our own commonwealth, and hurting the country, not only from the perspective of the energy bill you pay at the gas pump, to your heating oil, to your electricity bill, but also from a national security standpoint, because you're paying taxes to then send bullets to Ukraine and to arm and help Israel in its war against a terrorist country that we could choke out economically and force them to not be attacking their neighbors. It's such an easy equation, but we've walked away from it for some worshiping of this thing called the Green New Deal.
Congressman, just as energy security plays into national security, so does border security. And this has been a very hot button issue over the last several years under the Biden administration. Um, is this a political football that will constantly be debated without any real action to secure our border, but also reform our legal immigration process so that people who want to come here to this country and work and follow our laws can do so, and employers can hire them? Will we ever get to a deal in Congress to fix our immigration system?
John, obviously the immigration system is broken. As a second generation immigrant myself, I'm very respectful of those who go through the process that we have to come here. Unfortunately, you're right, and they're right. It's way too cumbersome. It takes too long. It's too expensive. That having been said, the American people are outraged, rightfully so, at the tens of millions of people just walking across the border and being in America. We already talked about the 13,000 murderers that are walking around our country, the 450,000 violent felons that have come across the border and are somewhere in our community, the unfortunate and untimely deaths that have occurred to our American citizens, for those who are here illegally. But there's other issues involved with that, and I just need to mention them. When you talk about housing, when you talk about healthcare, when you talk about education, Americans are taking a back seat, and it's not just down at the border. It's in Pennsylvania. There's a little town called Charleroi in southwestern Pennsylvania, where the citizens there are being redlined out of their own residences because people here illegally are receiving federal subsidies that jacks up the price of housing. The residents can no longer afford to live there, and now the illegals are pushing them out. And so you ask if we're ever going to get to a solution. I think people recognize the problem in Congress, but as long as my friends on the other side of the aisle are hell-bent on allowing as many people to come across the border illegally as is physically possible, there's not going to be a bipartisan solution. It's pretty clear at this point. We in the House passed what you know as HR2, the strongest border security bill ever to come through. We're going to need unified government. We're going to need a president that will sign that legislation so we can actually secure the border. The light at the end of the tunnel is if we can actually secure the border and deal with some of these internal problems and clean some of that stuff up, I think the American people will be much more amenable to changing and reforming our legal immigration system so that it serves America and it's respectful and empathetic to those who want to come to America.
Congressman, much like John brought up the topic of greedflation, the
Yeah.
other hot button issue this campaign season has been this idea that American democracy is being threatened, that it is fragile, that it is under attack. I wanted to give you a few minutes to talk about this issue, broadly speaking. Do you see American democracy as in a place of fragility, as under attack? And to the extent that you agree with that notion, what do you see as the actual threats to our form of government and our ability to be a healthy, prosperous, and self-governing people long after any of us on this call
Yeah.
are around?
It's one of the things that I think keeps people up at night, especially now. And I do think that democracy, let's first of all, let's really characterize it what it is. We have a republic, right? Operated democratically by voting, but it is fragile and it can be made fragile, especially when you're bringing in millions upon millions of foreign nationals who don't have any stake in America, who aren't connected uh, to the struggles of American and America and Americanism. If they're going to be allowed to vote, and they're being registered right now in Pennsylvania, that's a suicide recipe for the rest of the country, and people see that, and so they have this concern about it. And so I think that democracy is under threat. But I will tell you this: part of the system, it's always characterized as being under threat, but only from one political perspective. So I'm going to give the other perspective. In 2016, Bernie Sanders was on track to win the Democratic nomination. Now, Bernie Sanders is an avowed socialist who's running on the Democrat ticket, and the Democrats were so fearful that he would actually win and not be able to defeat the Republican that they used the dirty tricks that they are so well known for, pushed him out of the race and installed Hillary Clinton. These are the same people that say that the right is a threat to democracy. But that was in 2016. In 2020, it was a similar circumstance where they couldn't reach a consensus, and they pushed everybody else out of the race. Forget what the voters thought, the primary voters, and they elevated Joe Biden to the top of the race against the wishes of their primary voters. And we just saw it in 2024. My goodness, they disavowed every single primary voter that voted for their nominee and just installed their own person. But I don't know how this happens, but we have somebody that has never received one vote in a primary as the standard bearer for the majority party for the presidency. And so, yes, the democracy, the choices of the American people, if you look at it from that context, are being completely obliterated. But that doesn't end there. We survived as a democratic republic for a couple hundred years, voting on election day and standing there in front of the poll worker who checked your signature, who probably knew you from living down the street or something like that. We survived that way with that and absentee ballots that you requested if you could not be at the polls. And all of a sudden in the 21st century, we can't seem to get it right. We have all this mail-in voting. Nobody can make it to the polls. We don't get to know on election day. It takes weeks sometimes to figure out who the victor was. And I wonder, it sure seems to me that we're headed back. We're headed backwards. We have drop boxes being put all around counties, including in the district that I'm honored to represent. And nobody asked the question, why do you need a drop box for a mail-in ballot? Don't you have a mailbox? Of course, people have a mailbox. Nobody's being disenfranchised. If you can drive to a drop box, you can drive to the post office. You can drive to the Board of Elections and insert your ballot there. All these things serve to breed discontent, and people have reservations. They have questions. They don't fully trust our election system, our electoral process, And that is a very dangerous thing for a democracy, and certainly a republic that operates under democratic principles.
Congressman, we talked a lot about threats to the nation, but I want to look at opportunities now. In your intro, you went through your background, which really is the American dream. Growing
Yes.
up from modest means to starting your own business, to serving in the military, to now serving in Congress. What is your message to voters who may feel increasingly as though that same American dream that you experienced is becoming harder and harder to realize?
Well, I would tell them that I agree with them. First of all, it is harder and harder to realize. We started our business in my mom's garage with a couple $1,000 and a lot of hard work and late nights. But I think it's very difficult to do that these days, and that's unfortunate. And I think that as citizens, we have just been kind of willing to just let things go on and not really weigh in because it's uncomfortable, it's confrontational. But I think that America has been slowly waking up, and you saw some things. Certainly at the federal level in government. We saw the Speaker of the House for the first time in years and years, and I'm talking about back to John Boehner, had to leave, right, because wasn't getting the job done. And after that, you saw President Obama was the president during that period of time, but they saw this fundamental transformation of America, and they disagreed with it, and they fought back, and they elected President Trump. And then you fast forward the deal that we tried to make with Kevin McCarthy to actually cut federal spending just a little bit. It's still going to all be borrowed money, but just a little bit to at least signal that we got the message, and to make it more of a participant-based organization. So every member, whether you were in leadership or whether you were newly elected, whether you're Democrat or Republican, could just actually participate and advocate for your constituents. We thought we had a good thing going, but when it didn't work out, Kevin McCarthy's gone, and you see the intensity of the electorate right now. I think that with the pendulum has swung too far, and people and we've come to the challenge later than we should have. But I think there is a healthy recognition that things are very badly on the wrong track, and people are speaking up, and people are willing to stand up to say, hey, look, we've got to do something about this. And so I think that if you're saying the American dream is lost, how do I get there? It's probably not going to happen as fast as we'd like to, but I think there's a lot of people that see the perils of the track that we're on and want to reclaim the ability for people to be free and to choose their own enterprise and do great things for themselves, while at the same time do great things for their community.
I think we could probably have you on all day, but we appreciate the fact that you have constituents to get to, and more important people to talk to than us. But with just a couple of weeks to go until
Yeah.
election day, um, y- I wanted to give you a few moments. If there's a topic we didn't touch on, or just your closing argument to the people of Pennsylvania's 10th congressional district as you seek another term in Congress, what is the message, cutting through all the noise?
Yeah.
What is the message that you really want to leave them with, walking away from this conversation today?
Yeah, I think the message is that I recognize what the American dream is because I'm living it, and I want it not only for my children who are young, very capable young ladies themselves, still in middle school and high school, but I also want it for everybody else's children. But it's much deeper than that. I want it for every single person that's in this district, whether you live in the city or whether you live in the suburbs or out in the country, whether you work at nighttime or whether you work in the daytime, whether you're tall or whether you're not. Every single person deserves to know what the playing field is and to realize their maximum potential. And I have been fighting, whether at the state house or down at the federal government, as a reformer. My whole career has been as a reformer. And it's not picking on the left or the right, it's picking on the wrong that I see, no matter who's doing it. And so I'm asking for their vote because I think a vote for me is a vote to recognize their constitutional freedoms. A vote for me is to recognize that they earn their money that they work for, and they should be able to keep as much of it as possible. And they determine best where it's spent, not the state government, not the federal government. And that finally, we need somebody that's going to fight for our communities to be safe. It's one of the core functions of government. And when we're concerned about our own safety and I grew up where, when we finally did have a car and so on and so forth, You left the keys in the car, you left your front door unlocked, and it was that's how life was. Whether I lived in Harrisburg up on Berry Hill Street, or whether I lived down in the old farmhouse. And we've gotten so far away from that and mistrusting the community around us because it's become dangerous. That is not what America is about. And so I'm going to fight every single day with everything I have. I'm going to be straight with you. We're not always going to agree. That's for sure. But I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be respectful. I'm going to listen to your concerns, and I'm going to fight my hardest to make sure that you get to realize everything that makes your life wonderful and that your voice is heard. And so that's all I can do, gentlemen and ladies. I am, all I can do is tell you what I'm going to do. Go do it. Do my work. Pray to the good Lord and leave it in your hands. And it's always worked before. And I'm going to be happy with the outcome, no matter what it is, because I know I'm going to have done my best.
Well, given what's at stake for the future of the nation in this election, I just want to sincerely thank you on behalf of the folks at Broad and Liberty, Politics PA, the Voices of Reason team, the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. Congressman Perry, thank you so much for taking so much time to spend with us and provide uh, our viewers with such substantive dialogue here on the most important issues of the day. We really appreciate it. And I also want to thank John Anzer, my spot co-host today. John, thanks to you and to the Chamber for sponsoring the Keystone Candidate Forum, and look forward to doing it again soon. So, gentlemen, thank you both for your time today, and look forward to seeing you again. Good luck on Election Day, Congressman.
Awesome. Thank you very much. God bless you all.